Hi there everyone, and welcome to another session here with Dr. John Butler.
Hello, Ida.
Hi John, and I would like today if you can talk to us a little bit about the role of hypnotherapy in successful relationships. Relationships is always changing throughout history. What relationships means, why people get married. I know in the old days people might have got married to keep the land, to keep the prosperity within their circles, and it will be chosen as well. The partner would be probably picked. Your family would be picking for you who's the right person for you to marry. The parent may meet the other family, the other person, and say, oh, they seem a nice person, which has its benefits, because when a third party pick a partner for you, they won't perhaps just go on looks or beauty. They will want to see the qualities, where maybe in these days, like today, when we go on a bar, we look someone and we just look at the looks. And we say, oh, that person, that girl seems nice, I'll go and approach her. Or a girl may say, that guy's looks like he's got his hair nice, I'll go and say hello to him. And before we know it, we involve for right reason or wrong reasons. So I'm not sure. So perhaps you can tell us a little bit how a good hypnotherapy, good hypnosis, how can that help us learn about what a right person might be suitable for me? I guess it will also cover a little bit about ourselves, who we are.
Of course. Well, very important topic, of course, and we have run courses on transforming relationships, how to improve relationships using the methods of transforming therapy. When you suggested this topic about an hour and a half ago, I thought, well, okay, I'll give a very quick overview because there's a lot to talk about. Humans are social animals. We exist in relationships. From the moment we're in the womb, we're in a relationship, and that's a group of two people. When we're talking about relationships, we're talking about every aspect of relationships that occurs in life. As we go through life, and we are in the role of the child, the teenager, and then we form our own bonds with adults, and we may become married to somebody. And as you said, this involves a whole lot of ritual, beliefs, and expectations about what's involved. For obvious reasons, for social cohesion, for group, for financial reasons, for all sorts of reasons. But people's own particular preferences are very important as well to take into account. Our own selection of partners often doesn't end up as well as we might think. Based on maybe attractiveness to begin with, we look at all the factors that get people involved with each other at the beginning. And that's emotional, and it's of course physical and so on. So when we're talking about relationships, we're talking about a very broad field. It involves many kinds of levels of communications and interactions, expectations, beliefs, and so on. However, most of us are thinking in terms of a partner, a same-sex, gender, whatever, or opposite gender, sex. So when we talk about those problems that occur a lot in relationships, and we see how many people's relationships end in divorce, splitting up, divorce if they're married. There's a lot of problems can occur, and much of it has to do with not having really related well to ourselves. We start with clearing our baggage. Hypnotherapy teaches people to recognize their own problems, their own strengths, their own weaknesses, to look into those areas within themselves that need work so that we don't project those onto our partners, because that's inevitably where it will end up. The kind of relationships our parents have had, that has a lot to do with the kind of relationship we often create for ourselves. People often say, as I get older, I'm turning into my mother. And that's because early programs are so deeply, powerfully effective in our subconscious level. And it's subconscious power we need to bring to our relationships to make them better than they are. So we don't end up with dependency and codependency and all the resentments and other problems that can occur because he's not Mr. Right or she's not Mrs. or Miss Right after the first year or two of marriage. And we're accusing them of, he's not the person I thought he was. Well, no, you haven't seen that person at the beginning. More than likely, it's not that they've changed or changed very much. It's you haven't seen them clearly. You are looking through your projections. So when we talk about working on relationships, we don't get any help often at the beginning in our lives about this. Nobody teaches people how to create relationships very well, not in a systematic way. We learn through school, through playing with other children, we learn certain things, but there really isn't enough education about this. Hypnotherapists do a lot of work teaching people how to communicate, how to relate. It's part of the work we do. And a lot of the time, of course, it's occurring as a result of problems people are experiencing. I'm not happy in my marriage. Well, you might not be happy out of it either, you know. So how do you make it work rather than just running away from it, which sometimes is necessary. You know, the relationship needs to end. It's no longer has enough in it to create a long-term bond and so on. It requires communication, revelation, to create intimacy, to create bonds in a relationship, and to be able to get past just the projections of what you'd like them to see when they first go out with you, and you want to give a good impression, which is about impression formation and so on. There's a lot of work in psychology on this, a lot about how to self-concept, how we view ourselves. When that's not in a healthy place, we're really just playing a role. We want them to see something which we can't maintain long term. And so it's necessary to go through a certain period of self-development. If I'm working with couples and their problems, each person has to do their own work on themselves. So they're not just bringing the resentments, the lack of communication, poor quality communication, so on a constant basis, polluting the relationship so that they can eventually have a mature relationship. Because the first step of passionate interest in the other person, based on emotional and maybe physical factors, that's not going to sustain itself usually for more than a year or two at the most. Then we have to get into a different form of relationship.
They call it the honeymoon period, I think.
Yeah. We often say it goes from passion to compassion, which means a deeper form of bonding and love. And so there are similar areas of the brain that's been looked at, but there are also different areas now when we look at love. And there's all kinds of love, you know, which is sometimes a very romantic, very passionate. And then there's kind of selfless love, and so on. So when we talk about the love, lust, attachment, and all kinds of dependencies we have as people, we're talking about very deep structures within the brain, which are being studied. And nobody's very clear yet on all of what it all means. But we can see that we need to be able to function on all of the levels pretty well. And hypnotherapy, because it's so powerful at the synaptic level and at the deep subconscious emotional level, has a great deal to offer.
And all-encompassing for me. It's like an all-encompassing
Absolutely.
therapy.
It is. It's a holistic approach to the mind and the brain. And it deals with the emotional issues. It deals with the sexual issues and problems there. It deals with many other aspects of our own development and clearing our baggage, as I said earlier.
Yes.
So we're not just replaying mistakes from our parents.
Repeating the structure in one relationship
Repeating
to the
history,
next.
absolutely. And that's because when we don't understand our past, we often will bring, the past will slowly but surely come in to contaminate the present.
Yeah.
So we deal with how to make the very best bonding and communication happen within the relationship. Also, I'd say clearing the past, and then going into more detail about areas where, well, how people need to learn to communicate in ways that are quite sophisticated. I mean, do you give sufficient compliments to your partner?
Yeah.
Are there ongoing things in the relationship that need to change, that you need to do better in the way you bond? There's values and beliefs that people may have that are a bit incompatible or have difficulties at least, but are they sufficient to end the relationship now that you realize they're there, that we think differently in certain areas which we overlooked before in the heat of passion in the early honeymoon phase. So now we must grow up. It's called maturity, instead of just blaming the other person. And if you then find, well, I'm constantly attracting people who are abusive and negative, right? Well, what does that say about your mind and what you expect for yourself? If you keep doing it, it's not just an ordinary life learning experience. There's a self-sabotaging mechanism in your subconscious. You know, I always choose the men who abuse me or neglect me and so on. Or the man might be saying the same thing in slightly different language, but more or less the same thing. Yeah, well, you're making poor choices. So to become self-aware allows you to make better choices. You've cleared much of that baggage, as much as you as human beings, do we ever get clear of all of our past? Probably not. But at least we are in a much better place. And our relationship become much more fulfilling. We can enjoy the other person, their strengths, their weaknesses, as we have our strengths and weaknesses. We can interact with those in very creative ways. And hypnotherapists will program people for that, for positive expectations, to build on the positives. Because frequently, as human nature is, we look for the negative a lot of the time without realizing. If 80% of the relationship is good, 20% is difficult, it's very easy to focus on the 20%. So it eventually becomes the 80%. And so we have to teach people how to develop the relationship. Hypnotherapy is very powerful for helping people bond together. I put two people in a trance together and gave them the same suggestions. And in ways that we don't seem to quite understand, there's a kind of reciprocal effect between both parties. Being in the trance, it's very bonding at a deeper level, which tends to undercut some of those more superficial differences that they focus so much on. You know, he likes one kind of food, she likes another kind of food. There's somewhat different views politically, and they need to grow up and learn to mature to the point of being able to accept other people have a right to be different. You know, and that you can have different kinds of relationships, and it's not, as Prince Pearls would say, that neurotic love pact. I need them to need me. What need have I of other relationships in life, other women or men? You should be enough, and I should be enough. In Gestalt therapy, which is a strand, a very powerful and important strand of many strands in transforming therapy, we look a lot into those existential, experiential factors that go on in the relationship. You know, what they're really bringing into that situation, which is really nothing to do with the relationship itself. It's just their own fragmentation. We're not integrated enough in ourselves. How can we integrate with another person constructively? And so we have many tools, techniques to maximize the quality of the relationship. I haven't time to go into them all here, but once a person is making choices on their best values, best self-understanding, they'll be choosing the better relationships to start with, and then they'll be able to carry them out in a much more healthy, happy, harmonious way with their partner. And there may be many skills of forgiveness they need to learn in some cases to rescue the relationship, depending on what state it's in, and learning then how to integrate their own weaknesses into their strengths, so that then they become a much more effective partner. And with the other person then, if there's a healthy balance of giving and receiving, so there's not abuse, neglect going on, then we can go forward very much more effectively. So, you know, we're dealing with different relationships, very individual people, different levels and kinds of problems they may be experiencing. And a good hypnotherapist, properly trained, who has deep knowledge, who hasn't just been on one of these know-it-all courses in a week or 10 days or whatever, and where the knowledge is so superficial, and they're relying just on a few positive suggestions, which are positive suggestions, we say, if they're done well, and that's a big if, can be very helpful. But there's so much more to hypnotherapy.
Absolutely. John, thank you so much. And I think for the next episode, one of future episodes, we will do one on forgiveness, on learning to deal with forgiveness, with the word, with whatever that encompasses.
If you really understand what that word means, which is a very different emotional meaning to people often than what it really involves.
Perfect. So thank you so much, guys, for watching at home. Thank you, John, again. And we'll see you soon.
And thank you.